So, if you've read the title of this episode, then you have a vague idea of what I'm going to be talking about. World building. So, what is world building? Well, if you look at the definition, then this is what you're going to get. World building is the process of constructing an imaginary world, sometimes associated with a whole fictional universe. Developing an imaginary setting with coherent qualities such as a history, geography, and ecology is key. So, how I boil this down in my brain is world building is the act of creating a world that has a semblance of coherence, a world that makes sense. The next question to ask yourself is, why should I build a world? I'm going to answer this question on a personal level because all I can do is give you my reason for why I do it. I 100% of the time only ever world build. I don't use modules and never have, probably won't ever. Now there are a couple reasons for this. One, I'm kind of cheap. I didn't want to spend money on a module. It's just as simple as that. Two, and I mentioned this in a previous episode, but no one will know your world better than you do. Just point blank, that's how it is. I was always hesitant to run a module because in my mind, I would always struggle with the thought that I may not do the module justice or run it the way that it was intended to be run. On top of those thoughts, it just always occurred to me that it would take me significantly less time and less effort for me to just build my own world than it would to learn all the ins and outs of another person's. Now, at this point, you may be asking yourself, Ryan, what do you mean it's easy to just build a world? No, it isn't. I'm building something from nothing, and that takes a lot of imagination and creativity and work. And to that, my response is, you have kind of a point. If you listen to this podcast, then you know that I at least have some kind of interest in history and mythology, and that does help me 100%. But saying that segues me into my next point and why I said you only have kind of a point. If you're doubting your world building abilities, you don't have to build these worlds from scratch and bring light into the darkness. The foundation has been laid long before me and you came into the picture, whether that be through books, movies, television, video games, and other popular forms of media. Trust me, you're not in this by yourself. You just need to change your perspective on how you're approaching this problem and start looking for your different sources of inspiration that fit into the setting you and your group of friends have agreed to play in. This episode is going to assume some things on my end. I'm going to assume you and your friends have agreed on a general game setting, such as high fantasy, low fantasy, hyper-realistic, etc., and I'm going to assume you and your party have agreed on a general game type, like a dungeon crawler or if it's more roleplay oriented. These are just some of the important stepping stones that will help you in your decision making when it comes to world building. With the introduction out of the way, let's do some really basic world building because that is what the title of this episode is. Whatever I end up building in this episode is not trademarked, so please feel free to use any of this in your campaigns if you find it interesting or appropriate. Alright, after doing some thinking, I introduce to you the Lost City of Al-Kashim. For a lost city, it is deceptively well known. If you didn't already know of it, then surely you've heard the whispers and stories. Wise men have said that there are no maps of the city in existence, and the only people who find it are the ones who don't look for it. Though there are no maps, it is confirmed that the city is in the great desert of Ishvala. So, I'd actually created a rough skeleton of the city as a one-shot for a West Marches campaign that my friend was running, with the intentions of returning to it at some point. So I'd like to break down some of the things I did just with this very basic concept of a lost city. I knew in my head that no matter what, a couple of things were going to happen when I introduced this quest to the players. 1. There is no easy way of finding out how to get directly to the city. You just can't ask anyone. You won't find a map archived anywhere, and you won't be able to magic your way there. What I had in mind for solving this issue is that the players are going to have to solve it with checks. If my memory serves me right, the specific check I wanted was a high perception check at the beginning, and then as time progressed in the session, the check would get a tiny bit lower. So, for example, let's say the original check at the start was a 19. By the end, it would be like a 16. It's still high, but not impossible. Especially if your players are of a higher level, then feel free to change the DC as necessary. The type of check can also be changed to whatever you feel like is appropriate. So why did I settle on perception? Good question. When I designed the overall concept, I needed some kind of logic for why this desert was special. My answer to that is that the desert is magically magnetized, and the highest point of magnetic concentration in the desert was the city of Al-Kashim. So how does this translate into a perception check? Well, if your players meet the DC, then they'll start to realize that there's a slight pull on any metal objects on their person, small enough that it would otherwise go unnoticed. Depending on the state of your party, 1 or 2 more of these completed DCs brings them to the magnificent desert jewel that is the lost city of Al-Kashim. This brings me to my other point of guaranteed things that will happen before ever reaching the city. So why am I saying things like it depends on the state of your party, or that the DC will decrease slightly over time? Well, it's because of the second special feature of the desert itself. It's brutally hot in the Great Desert of Ishvala. And what do extreme conditions call for? Constitution saves. Each of these failed saves will graciously bestow your players with a level of exhaustion. And as we all know, too many exhaustion levels can kill your players. It's very possible for your players to die before ever reaching the city, but I had no intention of killing the players before ever reaching their goal. I wanted the trek to the city to be a resource drain, not a total party kill generator, even though the capacity for it is there. Issue 3. Not many people want to just sit there rolling dice with no clue why they're doing it. It's boring. So the way to remedy that issue is pretty simple. We sprinkle in some random encounters, and that should be enough to satiate your player's bloodlust and keep boredom at bay. Feel free to just sprinkle in ruins, abandoned carts, and anything else interesting you can think of. I didn't do this because, like I said, the game was a one-shot. I wanted them in and out with some loot in the 4 hours of our scheduled time block, but I designed it with the intention of returning and fully fleshing it out. So, on one hand, we've managed to give your players some grief, and on the other hand, you now have a magical desert that you can flavor with your own lore. Let's finally allow your players to see the Lost City. After many days and nights, with their resources dwindling, Waterskins holding on to any drop of liquid that found itself in its leathery grasp, and the feeling that their energy has been sapped from every fiber of their being, the group crests over a sand dune and they see walls. Great walls made of sandstone standing 40 feet high. As the adventurers make their way to the gates of the city, they're met by guards clad in dazzling gold armor. When the gate opened, it was a flash flood of stimuli to their senses. The aroma of different spices assaults their nasal cavities and changes with every step they take into the city. Excited haggling and bartering can be heard from all over. The debauchery and rambunctiousness, which is standard in any casino, seems to permeate through the city. This is the lost city of Al-Kashim, the jewel of the great desert of Ishvala. Boom! Cash that in and send it to the director. No, I'm just kidding. But You've established some dope visuals and sensory stimuli for the party's imagination to work with. Every village, city, or just any place you intend your players to frequent needs to have points of interest in it. These are specific and reliable places where players can go and they can either interact with things and people there on a regular basis, or they can at least bank on the idea that something interesting may happen in those locations. Points of interest don't necessarily have to be buildings. They can just be something interesting in the area. I kind of use the concept interchangeably to mean attractions in a city. But a point of interest can also be a random monolith in a field or a massive tree in a forest. So what are the main points of interest or social hubs in this city? Well, there are a few in the Lost City, so I'm going to kind of separate them and summarize them into a few areas. You have the Bronze Bazaar. This marketplace is where most of the traffic in the city tends to pass through at least once for one reason or the other. Most, if not all, of your players' shopping needs can be met here. The bazaar does recognize the common mediums of exchange in the game, namely copper, silver, gold, and platinum. But it isn't averse to bartering for goods. In fact, it is quite common practice if both parties agree and feel that the exchange is fair. You can use the barter system in many creative ways. Perhaps your players are holding on to some unnecessary magical items and see something more interesting in the bazaar. Maybe your party's low on cash but heavy on items. Perfect way to get rid of things in ye old inventory. How you choose to use the barter system's up to you. Just know that it's common in the Lost City. The next point of interest will be the Devil's Den. I probably have the most fun imagining this business, and probably compared to everything else in the city. The Devil's Den is essentially a narcotics dispensary owned and run by a succubus named Lust. Unlike most real-world dispensaries, you cannot leave the premises with your purchase. She essentially offers you a safe space to get high. The drugs she offers are recreational in nature and almost always highly addictive. Different drugs induce different effects, and all of them require varying constitution saving throws. A majority of the customers are regulars, and it's normal to see them sprawled out and shaking on the floor in their designated smoke pits, earning them the nickname Shakers in Al-Kashin. Most people in the city tell newcomers to avoid the shop altogether, but everyone has their vices. The most popular drug on the menu is forget-me-nots. Forget-me-nots are flowers that grow in the wild and yellow in color. They can commonly be found in bright sunny climates, much like the climate of the Great Desert. When consumed or smoked, the flowers apply a temporary new life. Once ingested, you believe you have a different and happier life. If a bloodthirsty assassin ate one, he could very well believe he's a humble lumberjack with a small family in the countryside with a white picket fence. At least for a couple hours. This drug is popular among those with depression and is believed to increase the sensation of depression in those who partake of it. The business is very professional and security is tight. You won't get many customers if they think they'll be robbed while they're in a drug-induced coma. The employees in the Devil's Den all wear masks stuffed with cleansing herbs to combat against the near-permanent cloud of smoke that is ever present in the Devil's Den. I think that drugs in D&D are a pretty great feature that don't get enough attention. Most homebrew drugs give buffs and debuffs that require some tinkering, but it adds immersion to the game that can lead your campaign into all kinds of crazy adventures you may have never considered. 100% I recommend introducing some kind of drug culture into your campaigns. In real life though, for legal reasons, drugs are bad, don't do them. With that disclaimer out of the way, I'm not just going to leave you hanging. In the description, I'll be attaching a link to 100 different fantasy drugs and their effects with the recommended saves. This list was a group effort in the D100 subreddit, and I take absolutely zero credit for any of it. I just use it as a tool or for inspiration. The next point of interest are the casinos. I'd originally just made one, but in hindsight, I would make like 3 or 4, so we're going to briefly do that now. I'm using the word casino, but I kind of just mean any building where gambling is the main source of income, and where gambling is the only form of business that takes place there, at least on the surface. These buildings can vary in size and aesthetic at your discretion. The main thing to keep in mind is that these casinos only specialize in one game. I want each casino to operate as its own faction in the city, which gives you and the players more options with how they want to interact with different entities, and give a variety of paths your players can walk down, should they choose to, and potentially change the power struggle in the city. Casino 1, the Colossus. This casino is in the shape of a small coliseum where bets are placed on matches. These matches can be to the death, or with a small payment of 50 gold pieces, you can pay for some life insurance and be spared should you lose the contest. Matches can happen between players and monsters, or players and NPCs you've created. The Colossus has also worked out a deal with the city where death row inmates have the chance to fight for their freedom. All spectators must pay an entrance fee of 10 gold pieces, and although these spectacles don't happen on a daily basis, the revenue generated from each event seems more than enough to offset the cost of upkeep by a wide margin. Casino 2, the Crazy 38. This casino specializes in dice games, specifically 38s and Vala's Choice. For 38s, everyone antes in and rolls a secret d20. A round of bets happen with raises and calls and folds similar to poker. The next round everyone rolls a secret d12, repeat the betting. Last round everyone rolls a secret d6, and then the final round of betting occurs before the reveal. Once the reveal takes place, the dealer has the option to flip a gold coin on the table to increase their total sum. Heads is worth 2, and tails is worth 1. A 38 beats everything. A 3 beats everything else. After that, highest number wins. A tie is settled with an open roll on the table, highest number wins. Ishvala's Choice, often shortened to Vala's Choice, is deceptively simple and an easy way to lose gold in a hurry. It's also the favorite pastime in the city. Roll the dice, and may Ishvala choose you, is the typical catchphrase for this game. In the casino, the minimum buy-in is 25 gold pieces. The rules are pretty simple. Players roll 2d6. If they add to a 7 or a 12, the player wins. Gamblers can double the bet to add 1d6 to the total. The last casino is Lizard Legs. It is established in a building with a serpentine shape, and they deal primarily in the racing of desert lizards. 5 small desert lizards are released in a small maze-like track that rests upon a table. The lizards themselves are in separate cages at the end of the table until released to race. Gamblers can bet as much as they'd like on one particular lizard with a 25 gold minimum. The rules for this game are simple. Roll 1d4 for each lizard 3 times, describing the stages of the race at each round of rolls. The lizard with the highest roll total wins, and those who bet on the winning lizard double their bet as winnings. Second place gets half of their bet back. 38s was created, at least from what I can tell, by the user Adventure Fight on the D&D Beyond website, and Ishvala's Choice as well as Lizard Legs are just a reskin version of Avandra's Favor and Quan Adrenzel, which was created by Matthew Mercer from Critical Role. So that's all the casinos and all the points of interest I managed to think up in this short period of time. Of course, there are other things to add, like temples, some form of government and the building that operates out of, etc. Things I would add in because of the vibe I got while writing would be a complex criminal organization. I really wanted to capture a Las Vegas vibe and even a New Vegas vibe from Fallout. I wanted the city to be kind of a city of vices, where seemingly unlimited riches can be gained and lost. That kind of wraps up the world building, so I just want to talk about the inspiration that brought up the concepts in the city itself. Why is it a lost city at all? The thought behind this is similar to that of the island of Tortuga in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's mentioned in the movie that the only way to find Tortuga is to get lost. The name of the desert itself was also inspired. Ishvala is the name of a race of people in the anime series Full Metal Alchemist. And on top of that, it just kind of sounds exotic and like it would fit in a desert. The idea behind the Devil's Den is roughly based off of the concept of the questline Tranquility Lane in Fallout 3, where people are permanently trapped in a simulation. The difference being that in the Devil's Den, people choose to leave reality on their own. The Colossus is just the Roman Colosseum, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned all the other sources for things whenever I talked about them. Like I said in the beginning, if you're having trouble world building or imagining something, then don't worry about coming up with something completely and totally new. Look around in your brain and think about all the things you found interesting in books, movies, games, television, and history. Music also helps a ton in the creative process. If you have a rough idea of something, maybe pull up music or an audio track that you think would fit in the same kind of zone as the vibe you're trying to capture in whatever it is that you're designing. In all honesty, this is still a bare bones version of what the city of Al-Kashim can be, but it's definitely enough to get the creative juices flowing. I imagine it being a massive desert oasis, with tons of exotic spices and tapestries. The buildings are an assortment of bright colors and gold, filled with the mega rich and ultra poor. A place where dreams can be made and crushed. The desert's ultimate trap. That brings us to the conclusion of this D&D episode. Maybe Al-Kashim and the desert will find its home in your games. If not, I at least hope that this episode gave you some ideas and maybe even given some of you newer DMs a different perspective on how to approach world building in your games. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I do have a Patreon linked in the description below if any of you would like to support the show. I also have a Facebook page under the same name as the podcast, which will be linked as well. If you have any ideas you want me to do an episode on, then feel free to send me an email at mythshistorydnd@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you tune into the next one.